Today we're gonna welcome to the show Jonatan, a Swedish. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hey, hello, hola, привет,
Hello.
salam, ahlan,
Okay.
see ya. That's some of the languages I speak. Say
One
hi.
after the other one. We're already off to a great start, off to coming in hot. But again, welcome to the show. We're very excited to see about what your very interesting and unique journey is. Honestly, I'm very excited. I can hardly contain myself. I would really want to jump straight into the world of medicine because it's a very, very important topic for a lot of people. But before we go to that direction, I think it would be nice, just like we did at the beginning of our episode, if you can give us a little bit of a personal journey and what you're all about.
So my name is Jonatan Heile. In Swedish we say Jonatan, and there's different ways of pronouncing my name in other languages. But anyway, I was born here in Sweden, in northern Sweden, and my parents are from Eritrea. So as a child, I had two different languages at home, both Swedish and Tigrinya. And it's an interesting story how I got into languages because as a child, I was actually not the language person. I had a 2-year older sister, and she was much more extroverted than me. When I was a child, I was a bit introverted, and I was in my own world and dreaming, daydreaming, all this, like a philosopher. And that also made her, she was speaking more. So when our relatives came to speak to us in Tigrinya, she would be obviously speaking much more than me. And then they thought, well, I'm not the language person because she was a language person, and then I was something else. So math was my thing in school also. So I got that label. I thought that languages is not my thing, but today it's completely the opposite, so it's interesting.
You'd be surprised how many people have the same exact mentality. So if you ever think that you're never a language person,
So we go further. When I was 12 years old, we in Sweden we could choose another language apart from English that we learned early on in school, and we could choose between Spanish, French, and German. And for me it was very easy to choose Spanish because the teacher, his name was Lars, was a very, if you look at him, you would think this very typical Swedish person. But when he spoke, it was completely opposite. He was like a Spanish person with all this passion when he spoke and character and joking and like talking loud. It was like this amazing energy he had. So I thought, I want to learn Spanish. And that was the best thing. I had really fun on every class with him. And yeah, it was all of a sudden words were just fun thing to play around with, learning a language. And I found out that it was easy for me to remember the words. And I had a guy in my class, his name was a friend, his name was Robert, and words that didn't really exist, a bit silly words, this typical thing you would do. And he was so tired of us and he was exhausted, and he was always laughing with us. And then I'm also thinking I can be really good at, or maybe even I really enjoy it. And the interesting thing about this was that was my Spanish became my favorite subject in school. All of a sudden, my Tigrinya got much better. So that was very interesting for me to see, like, well, maybe it's not about being a language person or not. Maybe something else is much more deeper than what we believe when we are labeling ourselves or labeling each other who is what.
it's definitely like, I feel like a book that you have to get a grade on. And I think that's one of the main frustration that a lot of people have about the education system. But Advantage doesn't. Like, you have to find your own way to make it entertaining, because I have not a similar story to your fake fake words, because I would love to learn more about fake words. So prepare maybe a couple of examples for later. There's always ways to make yourself entertaining. I don't know if you guys have any like fun language games or techniques that I've used in the past, or
For me, it wasn't really techniques or games, it was more dancing.
And-
For me, it was also Spanish, like for you, Jonathan. So I didn't really plan to like learn speaking and like knowing more for Spanish, but then I went full into like salsa and bachata, and like everything is in Spanish there. Some reggaeton too, and that's like how I got more into this language. And I wanted to know what the lyrics meant and what the people were talking about, like what the figures, like the names of the figures in dancing were all about. So this is how it started for me.
And I think like music can get a very big part on learning languages. Like for me personally, like whenever people are asking me, oh, can I learn Italian through songs? I always tell them just because it's for dialect reasons, and like much more like focus on specific slang or specific regional dialects. But for Spanish, it's a very common thing. And I would like to ask you, maybe Jonathan, if you had a similar experience with the Spanish music, maybe.
Oh yes, dude. So for me, as I said about my childhood as being a bit shy, language in the Spanish language and also music found my passion through that, because I was playing guitar as a child and also used to sing a lot in choirs, and found an artist that was my favorite artist when I was around that age, 12 too. And his name was Björn Afzelius, and I used to perform his songs on every 2 times a year, like when we finish school, like before Christmas and before summer. There's always people who used to sing in front of all the students, and I was one of those. And I was always singing his songs, and he was actually a lot of times in Latin America, and some of his songs were taken from an artist called Silvio Rodriguez, a Cuban artist, a troubadour, singer-songwriter. And that also got me into Cuban music and this troubadour, the guitar and singing. And those songs were very, like, the lyrics were very deep and complex and poetic. So my vocabulary got much better because I was combining the music and the learning songs by heart with words that you learn more than normal words that you maybe wouldn't use in your daily life. That was like potentiating both of these things. Spanish language and the music together really made it, really improved my Spanish and made it much more fun to even go into a new world, because that's what I was doing. I was coming to a new world through the language and music.
It's very interesting knowing this. It happened in other episodes as well, because I personally have a pretty tough time relating to lyrics in general for music. When I love music, but I usually like the instrumental side, the technique style, not necessarily the music. And going from a different language might sound a lot harder. So I wanted to ask you a little bit. Do you think that you were learning this, were you entering these lyrical worlds and understanding these lyrical content pretty fast, or did it take time to actually starting to actually relate to the lyrics, in your opinion?
It's a very interesting question, because when it comes to learning a language, music has always been like my entrance into the language, and I also usually try to find an artist that would be symbol for that, and usually an artist maybe who focus a lot of lyrics and has an importance in the culture, and that's actually what draws me into the language and the lyrics. So yes, it's also connected, because when I can sing in that language, those words would stick to me longer than if I would just memorize it as like a couple of words as it is, because it has another meaning. And when it's in a song, you get everything included. You don't have to study grammar, because it should be correct grammar. Sometimes in songs it's like a bit different than it is, but yes, it depends on the type of music and the lyrics that it is. But you get a lot of expressions, you can get different words that express things, and the emotional side of it, I think that's the biggest part, because when we are learning through something that's connected to our emotions, for me, music has this really strong connection with my emotions, and also being able to perform and sing it, it's like doubles up the learning, I think.
Super interesting. I can totally relate to that. I'm learning languages with music, and this relation to your emotions really helps to remember them. So that's a really good way to go. Now, we talked a lot about the artistic side of music, of language learning, and it would be interesting for us to know a bit more about the professional side of languages and using your languages. So as a doctor, how is it for you when you find language barriers with your patients? What does it make in the difference how you treat, or how people are treated?
It's interesting, very important, interesting topic. Before telling about this, I want to say that I also was living abroad after high school. I went to Spain to study history and language and all this. And then I also studied medical school abroad in Hungary for 6 years. So I did the medical school in English. And I've seen the language barriers from both sides, because the international students that studied with me in Hungary, most of them never even learned Hungarian, despite being there for 6 years. It's a very common thing among the international students in general, because they could speak English to each other. So it was one of the few who actually learned Hungarian fluently. So I could really see the difference in the way we could even understand each other, because they would actually ask for me to translate for the other medical students when talking to a patient. But besides, when I came back to Sweden to work as a doctor, I've seen it too, and I can really see how big difference it makes, because you go from being patient doctor to two human beings meeting each other and connecting simply because of talking to them in their native language. That's a thing that it can never. I see this also in my daily life. If I speak to a person in a language that that person didn't expect me to speak, but this is much more powerful when you are a patient and suddenly somebody understands you just by showing how they understand you through the language, and that is very special in a unique situation, I think.
It's interesting because there's a lot of ways to understand if a doctor knows a certain amount of languages, but the problem is that most of the time he can't when you go into a doctor, you're selecting a doctor, you're booking an appointment, cannot be specifically known what type of language do you speak. So my question becomes like, do you tend to tell them already in advance that you speak their language, or like, can you understand them immediately what language they're speaking? Or is it like more of like a surprise where they're not expecting you to know the language and they're just surprised and situation changes? Like what in practice, how does that look?
That's a very good question too. First of all, about hearing, guessing which language they speak, I think I'm quite good at it because of the music and hearing different accents. Once I could spot that a doctor that was talking to me at a conference actually had Hungarian origin. Not because her Swedish was bad, because she was really good in Swedish, but I could hear some of the tones or sounds, how she was pronouncing the words. So actually, I just started to speak to her in Hungarian. I was correct, and she was saying like, how would you that I'm from Hungary? And is my Swedish that bad? So it was not the case.